Mobius Front 83 is a turn-based tactics game by Zachtronics, released in 2020. They are among the more interesting developers of the last decade, known mostly for puzzle games structured around the themes of automation and programming. Their releases are distinct, well-crafted, and compact, which makes them stand out in the ocean of garbage that is the indie scene. Occasionally, Zachtronics releases a game that is a bit different from what they are usually known for, and Mobius Front is one of those odd ducks in their catalog. Since I enjoy wargames and turn-based tactics, I was interested in seeing how Zachtronics would approach making a game of this sort. After finishing it, I have to say I found their approach to be rather bland. The good things about the game shouldn't surprise anyone that is familiar with the company. First and foremost, they did a great job in stylizing this game. Even though it is minimalistic, the UI looks great, and so do the unit models and the hex grid. A lot of small things went into the game's presentation, whether it's the visuals of the obligatory solitaire and puzzle minigames, or the short cutscenes that accompany each mission. The effort that the developers put into the theme is appreciated. The result is a game that has a distinct identity, structured around the theme of 80s Cold War in America, with a bit of a sci-fi twist. It helped making this game much more memorable, even if the story and combat scenarios are not very impressive. As far as gameplay is concerned, there are a variety of tools to play with and many different approaches toward missions, since you control not only movement and actions, but also the type of units your regiment deploys. The game is heavily focused on outmaneuvering your opponents, and that's reasonably satisfying to pull off. But that's as far as I'm willing to go in praising the game. Now, why is it that I don't recommend Mobius Front? The simple form of the answer is that it's rather shallow. Yes, there are a lot of units, but their tactical use and mechanics are very similar. Yes, there are a lot of missions, but the way the maps and the enemies are set up barely challenges your playing style. Meaningful variety is lacking, unique challenge and progression are almost absent, and the mechanics are a bit too simplified for my taste. To cover this with a bit more detail, I'll use the beautiful Steam community to bounce some ideas off, refine my thoughts, and hopefully give you a better understanding of the game, so you won't be misled by reviewers that just parrot each other's nonsense. This person, who is fairly representative of the game's negative reviews, said, "Insanely difficult. Enemy units are far more capable than what the player has. Enemy units are able to move out of range of infantry and shoot in the same turn, resulting in infantry units being unable to destroy enemy vehicles." I think you get the point here. Later he claims that the AI will never enter into range of player units, making defensive gameplay or setting up traps impossible. Both of the main points of this review are misleading. First, lack of complete symmetry between units is one of the key components in making military scenarios interesting, unique, and challenging. It's not an inherent flaw, and in practice, Mobius Front has minimal asymmetry when it comes to units, making this complaint very strange. But I think I know where the reviewer got this idea from. In the very first missions of the game, the enemy deploys a mobile assault vehicle that can move and shoot during the same turn. The reviewer probably interpreted the lack of equivalent unit as unfair asymmetry that goes fairly deep into the game design. In reality, the player gets units like that very quickly in the campaign with practically identical stats. Overall, asymmetry in stats and mechanics is very minor in this game, and I would say that the truth of the matter is that Mobius Front is leaning too much on symmetry and not the other way around. The scenarios are too symmetric to offer a good sense of progression and unique challenge, making the missions very predictable. All it takes is learning the mechanics and experimenting a tiny bit with army composition and scouting. Another reviewer wrote, like others said, it's a puzzle game wearing the clothes of a tactical war game, which could have worked great, and as it is, it's not bad, but the levels are designed to be very difficult, so each one is a puzzle that can take an hour to solve, and one bad move or unlucky dice roll means you'll have to start it over. It's all interesting, but also too much of a slog at times to be fun. I often see people writing stuff like that about a lot of games. It's one of those statements that seems mostly meaningless to me. Wargame scenarios that are pre-configured and turn-based can all be described as a type of puzzle game. I'm not sure it's a helpful distinction. What is true and useful to know about Mobius Front in particular is that it's not very convincing in simulating warfare. The stats and rules are meant to enforce balance under the limitations of the game, so you can imagine a lot of them bear little resemblance to their real-world counterparts. The game has artillery pieces equipped with reasonably large guns that can't penetrate any armored unit, for example. Choices like this can be attributed to balance concerns, such as the trade-off between range and firepower, but I'm sure Zachtronics could have tried to come up with more elegant solutions to that. The other part of the argument is that scenarios take too long and are too RNG dependent. Complaints like that are often missing the point. The RNG in Mobius Front, like most other competently made games, serves a purpose. It is made to make you think before putting yourself in certain positions. Instead of being able to perfectly calculate outcomes, the developer wants you to ask yourself, what is going to happen in the worst case scenario here? Can I afford that? And so on. What people forget to mention when they cry about RNG is that they've positioned themselves in a manner that makes them rely on rolls, which is precisely what RNG is supposed to teach you to avoid. I can assure you that I was punished for sloppy plays plenty of times without it dooming the missions. The margin of error is not as slim as people claim. One part of this review is definitely true though. The game is a bit of a slog. Not because the missions are long, but because Zachtronics weren't creative enough with the maps and objectives. The game has a lot of missions, and the vast majority of them play out exactly the same way, unfortunately. This game feels like it's not fun on purpose. I decided I wasn't going to give it any more of my time when I realized that the enemy magically knows all the position of your units and will refuse to enter range unless they're absolutely guaranteed to trade damage evenly. The crying goes on for a while, and then he says, the AI pussyfooted around for tens of turns, refusing to close in because it magically knew I had a line of Tau launchers ready to nuke their normally super aggressive tanks. Super disappointed because I usually love Zachtronics games. Definitely do not recommend this anti-fun game. It's great to end the review with this one because it brings out a very important question. Is the game anti-fun? But first, again, there are these claims about the AI that are just not true. I don't know exactly how vision works for the AI, but it clearly doesn't have perfect information. Enemy spearhead units like vehicles and helicopters often cross a checkpoint or move across tree lines to check what's on the other side or to improve their positioning in relation to one of the units that currently threatens them. Just as you'd expect, this results in them being punished. I think this is another case of people assuming a lot of things before bothering to learn the mechanics properly and spend a bit of time on the game. Now it's time to reflect on the anti-fun question. As I indicated from the beginning, Mobius Front consistently does the same thing with very superficial changes. New units slowly appear, they don't matter that much. New maps, they all mostly function the same. Objectives, identical in practice, and so on. I'll tell you a little bit about the way it works. The maps are heavily forested, and movement of vehicles is limited by choke points. You either need to capture all the control points, destroy a special set of units on the other side of the map, get some of your own units across the map, or some combination of these. The difference in practice is very slight. Combat logic is inescapable once you get a bit of experience. Infantry might be sluggish and low-ranged, but they are a great tool for denying choke points from the enemy, and more importantly, scouting. The only way to consistently lose is to send valuable units forward without vision. The mechanics of the game are too simple for it to work any other way. These positioning skirmishes are enjoyable during the first few maps, but it gets tedious fairly quickly. The game tries to change the formula a bit with air power and artillery, but they are just harassing tools with very little depth to their mechanics. Only during the third and final chapter, the enemy starts benefiting from more elaborate pre-configured defenses to complement their dynamic deployment. This was a step in the right direction, but map layouts remained too similar. And in addition, at that point the game felt rather stale because I had to spend more than 30 missions getting there. It wasn't a painful experience to get through the game, but I expected a more creative twist on the game's mechanics and progression from Zachtronics. Considering it's reasonably polished and very straightforward mechanically, I would say that it's a decent game, especially for beginners. Just a bit bland and unambitious when you consider the amount of time you have to go through to finish it.